Wargames is a card that is truly representative of the conflict the game Twilight Struggle is looking to recreate. Everything was at stake, and things could go one way or the other at any time. Today we will look at this most interesting card on Legendary Tactics. Wargames is arguably the most fascinating event in the entire game of Twilight Struggle. Its effects are so thematic and powerful that both players must take this event into account in the late war. It is both a mercy rule and a catch-up mechanic rolled up into one. Let's take a better look at how players should be using this card. First of all, the event. Wargames is a starred, 4-ops, neutral, late war event card. If the DEFCON level is at 2, either player can trigger this event. Doing so can end the game immediately without the final scoring phase after giving your opponent 6 victory points. Please note that you are allowed to trigger the Wargames event without ending the game or handing your opponent 6 victory points. You might want to do this if you want to get it out of the deck as your opponent is in a position to take advantage of it. It is not enough to just take the operations points because if it is in the discard pile, it is vulnerable to being recovered by either salt negotiations or Star Wars. You might also want to do this if you've drawn the Wargames event card with Missile Envy and your opponent is in a position to win the game from it. Also, please note that this event only works if the DEFCON level is at 2. The event cannot be triggered at DEFCON 3 or higher, and therefore would not be removed from the deck in that circumstance, as it did not meet its prerequisite. For the Soviet player, as a general rule, this is a good card for you. As the game goes on, the US typically gains ground and sets up an advantageous final scoring situation. This card allows you to bring the game to a quick end while you are still ahead. For the US player, the good news is that if you can use Wargames for the win, you are likely in a position to win the game at final scoring anyway. So there are some interesting decision points here depending on the state of the board. Let's look at some potential scenarios. The first is if you have Wargames in hand and have at least a 7 victory point lead, or you think you can get there this turn. The key then is to worsen DEFCON to 2 without accidentally overdoing it and losing by DEFCON suicide. Remember that as the late war begins and Wargames enters the card mix, your savvy opponent will likely be looking to assist you in overdoing it. This is an aggressive approach and you must be judicious in its application. For the Soviet player, one straightforward but somewhat risky way to do this is to play a DEFCON lowering card as a headline and play Wargames for the event to win the game in the first action round before the US can respond. This is vulnerable to aggressive US headlines like Soviets shoot down KAL-007 though. The Cuban Missile Crisis card event, if it's still in the deck, can be a safer way to accomplish this same goal. The US player always has to allow for the fact that the Soviet will get at least one action round to respond to the threat of a loss by Wargames. I would expect a scoring card on their first action round, or some other action that gets the victory point differential to 6 or less. If you suspect that the Soviets have a favorable scoring card to play, you may want to avoid degrading DEFCON during the headline phase and instead take a battleground country coup to get DEFCON down to 2 and set up your win. Don't take unnecessary risks in the headline phase if you don't need to. Think it through and assess the board state to make your best possible decision. If you think the Soviet player will need a few action rounds to counteract the threat, however, you will generally want to worsen DEFCON to 2 as soon as you can to limit the USSR response time. You can use the headline phase to do this, but again, be aware of potentially losing to DEFCON suicide, as your opponent may try to trick and trap you into rushing you into lowering DEFCON. There's no doubt that this is a risky option and you need to weigh that risk against how the game is going in general, and if you don't need to hurry it, don't take the chance. The second scenario is if your opponent likely holds Wargames and has a 7 victory point or more lead. If you have any advantageous scoring cards, obviously score them as fast as you can. Use the headline phase for this if necessary, even if the DEFCON requirements haven't been met yet. You have no idea what other tricks your opponent may have up his or her sleeve. If you don't have a scoring card, take a look to see if you have a DEFCON lowering card that you can play in the headline phase. Your opponent will likely be trying to degrade DEFCON to meet the requirement for Wargames, and the idea is to catch them off guard and have them lose by DEFCON suicide. It can be a risky play, however, as if the ploy doesn't work, you may be accidentally helping them along. Another option is if you have a card event that forces them to discard or otherwise manipulates their hand. Cards like Terrorism, Aldrich Ames Remix, and 5-Year Plan can potentially send Wargames to the discard pile at the best possible time. Other cards like Missile Envy and Grain Sales to Soviets can potentially help you extract the Wargames event so you can use it for your own nefarious purposes, including playing the event without handing over the victory points or ending the game, as mentioned earlier. Or you can buy yourself some time with either Quagmire or Bear Trap. Hopefully you can get some victory points somehow in the meantime to counter the danger the Wargames event poses. And there's also cards that potentially help you with managing DEFCON by keeping it at 3 or more. Managing DEFCON is, in many ways, the trickiest way to go, as generally there's nothing you can normally do to stop your opponent conducting battleground country coups and lowering the DEFCON to 2. While it doesn't help you manage the DEFCON level, a card like Yuri and Samantha might give you the victory point or 2 that you need to avoid a loss via the Wargames event, so that is an alternate play if the score is close. However, if you're looking to actively manage the DEFCON level, there are some options. The Nuclear Subs event, for example, can be extremely useful in preventing the US from lowering the DEFCON to 2 via coups. And if they're still in the deck, Salt Negotiations or How I Learned to Stop Worrying can also potentially help buy you time and options by improving DEFCON significantly. If you ever see your opponent doing pointless coup after pointless coup to lower DEFCON, you know that they are likely going for the win by Wargames and can respond appropriately. Try to get some victory points from scoring cards, events, or even the space race while your opponent is distracted. If you get either of them in turn 7, it might even be worth holding on to Salt Negotiations or How I Learned to Stop Worrying if you find yourself vulnerable to a potential loss to Wargames in turn 8 and use them then. The final scenario is more straightforward. If whoever holds Wargames is not close to the victory point threshold of 7 or more, that player has the choice of either hanging on to Wargames for a potential use in a future turn, or to take the 4 operations points and go for the win in final scoring. If you want to improve your chances of getting Wargames, some events like Our Man in Tehran or Ask Not What Your Country Can Do For You can help you to mill the deck to get it into the game sooner, although there's no guarantee that you will draw it. Playing cards like Salt Negotiations or the China card slows down this process by limiting your card draw, although I doubt that consideration will be top of mind if you're using these 2 powerful cards. So in summary, Wargames is a powerful event that beginners might find either too swingy or anticlimactic, as it can feel like it brings the game to a sudden end just when things were getting good. For people who have some experience with the game and know the card is in the deck, this card is an incredible source of tension that you must play around and prepare for, even if it never comes out. The Cold War was a high-stakes game, and an event like Wargames can certainly bring out that feeling in the players. Don't underestimate this event, and use it well. This has been our analysis of the Wargames card in the game Twilight Struggle. We hope you got some value out of this video, and if you did, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe down below. Thank you so much for watching. This is Legendary Tactics.